Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today, and I'm very excited. I know you like the little hands. Got to bring it all in, right?
I agree.
Uh, as a quick heads up, I just want to remind everybody make sure you like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way, you get your email in the mornings whenever we go live, which is every day. So, make sure you do that. Now, we are not doctors. Again, I'm going to say this one more time. So, anything that we do say is our own personal experience. And if it interests you or intrigues you, by all means, do your own research. That's a big one. If you have any questions or comments, put them up in the comments section here so that we can put them up on the screen and discuss any questions or anything that comes up. So, that's all I got for the beginnings of this. But any thoughts or questions before we get started? No? All good? Okay. Let's dive right in. So, the topic today, achieving peak performance. Now, as I was saying to both Seb and Tony here a second ago, was the fact that I'm going to let you guys talk most of the time because I am in no way in peak performance right now. So, I'm going to leave the conversation to you guys, but I'm going to ask a lot of questions. First one, right off the bat, is what is peak performance in your guys' point of view? How would you define peak performance? Seb, I'm going to put you on the fire right off the bat.
Well, the answer is it depends on context, right? What are your win conditions? What is it that you are after? So if you're talking on an athletic standpoint, is this speaking for an actual performance of a day, a week, a month, or are you looking at being in the tactical world or a tactical athlete and having the ability to perform in a variety of tasks unimpeded, day in and day out? Sorry, something happens with the sound here. It was weird.
Sounded good.
And yes, and so it ultimately depends what are we exactly talking about, because it's a very broad subject. So, but ultimately, how do we achieve peak performance in the physical realm, in the mental realm, the emotional realm, like all those things? So it depends what we're talking about.
Raj. Tony, what do you think? How would you define peak performance?
Yeah, so like you said, it depends, but I would assume peak performance is your ability to perform at the highest level, whatever the circumstances is for that given day. So peak performance is something that is probably not attainable day in and day out. It's something that you have to strive for so that you're ready to perform on that given day. So if it's getting ready for an exam, right, you study and you don't wait till the last minute to study so that you're ready to perform when it's time to take a test. If you're doing a jiu-jitsu competition, it's training and peaking and getting your body and mind right before the competition so that when the competition's there, you're able to perform at the absolute highest level that you're capable of for that given day.
Yeah, 100%. Sean, thoughts?
Yeah, I do. So, much like Seb and Tony have said, I think that peak performance can be viewed through a lot of different lenses, but certainly the three that I think of are the now or currently, we'll just call it today for lack of a better term, an event or a milestone that I've circled on a calendar thinking, okay, I need this amount of time. My prep looks like this. My taper peak is going to last this long. And when I stand on the start line of whatever, XYZ, it's time to kick that ass maximum. And so there's that aspect of peak performance. And then there's the third piece, as far as I'm concerned, and that's your life. And those are three very different phases. Those are three very different approaches. And I believe all three of them can be peaked out or can be efficiently and effectively pursued in order to get the best outcome for each of those three target locks, if you will.
Outstanding. Now, before we get farther into the conversation, I want to ask this one particular question. Is there anything that, in all of the different realms within peak performance, is there any one thing that covers them all? Is there something that somebody can do specifically that will?
Mindset.
There you go. I was leaning into that, but by all means, take it away, Sean.
Yeah, I think for sure it's mindset. I'll debate that with anyone in the world that mindset is everything in respect to peak performance or high performance or just even average performance mindset. And I spoke about it, or I wrote about it a little bit this morning in my IG post again, and I said this, that and this is the best way that I can explain it, though how I'm going to explain it is easily just change the words a little bit and change the story a little bit, and it refers to every single one of the careers that I've been involved in every aspect of my life, and it goes along these lines. So, for the 15 years that I was high performance race coaching, it was a really common question. In fact, it was the most common question that I was asked by either athletes that wanted to be coached by me or standard issue pedestrians, the layman, someone who may be at a race event, like a 24-hour solo race event, and they're just standing on the sidelines observing. And they will almost 100% of the time ask the question, how hard is a 24-hour solo mountain bike race? How do you even, is it even possible? How is it even possible to do a 24-hour race? This was the common question. How hard is it? How hard is it? And is it even possible? And I would always give the same answer, generally speaking, and it would be along these lines. How hard is it and how is it possible? Well, much like life, this race is 90% mental and the other 10% is mental. That's it. Do the math. That is life. That is racing. That is 24 solos. That is a 24-hour day that you can race every single second of the day and get the outcome that you expect of yourself by using mindset. It doesn't matter if you got one leg or two legs. It doesn't matter if you got one eye or two eyes. It doesn't matter how much you trained or how little you trained. What does matter when the gun goes off is mindset. And so there's nothing even comes close in my world to the importance of mindset. Everything else is so far off on the distance that it's barely visible.
Yeah. Seb, or actually Seb, yeah, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and then to go along with that, once the mindset is dialed in, now you're looking at the intricacies around the training regimen, to the training program, and those types of things. So now you're combining the two. And so the mindset, as Sean alluded to, for me is the foundation of everything you'll build upon. There is no skills, including leadership or all the things that people want to learn, that you can teach to somebody that has the wrong mindset, that will be weaponized the way it should. And so that goes along with everything, periodization in the training realm or whatever the case may be. You are going to need to have that as the foundational basis before anything else can be built upon it. But once you have that, now is go time. Having the right training regimen, having the right periodization, having the right coaches, et cetera, right?
Yeah. Tony?
Yeah, I think defining kind of the idea of mindset and what that means for each individual is going to be important for people to understand where they fit within that dynamic, because a mindset for a person who works a 9-to-5 job with a husband or wife and kids may look completely different than a mindset for a professional athlete in terms of what they're able to actually achieve, how they're able to actually set goals that are realistic. I think when you talk about mindset, you can kind of push a lot of people away because it can be termed in an extreme manner that you have to have this all or nothing mindset in order for you to be successful. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. So just defining mindset for each individual and what they're capable of, and making it just a little bit beyond that scope so that they have to overcome something to achieve it, I think is going to be very important. So it is the biggest driver for you to be successful, but I think that it is going to need to be a lot of inter-individuality for it when it comes to kind of defining that process.
Sure.
Tony,
Just
go
sorry.
for it. No,
Just to jump on that, because that's a great point that's being made. I view it slightly differently in that, not that anything that Tony said wasn't correct. It is correct, but what I don't like is if you're having that conversation and you give them an out, they will take that out. So for me, it's like, yes, mindset is important. Those are some of the basic things that you must do, but there are levels to it. So you can dial in and up the level. The actual components of the mindset are not different from a highly performing athlete to the person that wants to do okay in a jiu-jitsu tournament. those components are exactly the same. The intensity and the level at which they're operationalized is different. And so if I'm having a conversation with somebody about mindset, we can talk about the David Goggins of this world, going around doing certain things. And if you're talking to a soccer mom or an office worker and you're talking about Goggins, you've already shut him down, right? But you're gonna take all of those components and you're gonna essentially scale them for where you are in space and time and what your win conditions are in relation to what you want to accomplish.
Sean, you got any thoughts on that?
I do. And so the Tony and Seb are saying the same things that are running through my head. The little tweak that I would like to make is this, and I can only base this on the boatload of athletes that I've worked with around the world and my own experiences, my own observations of people that I've never worked with, but I've seen high performers, of course. I've done a bit of high performing myself. And so I feel that based on everything that I've observed, people come in all different shapes and sizes and packages. And by package, I mean what's going on in their head. And so I can look at a person pretty quickly and ascertain how long it's going to take them to get what they want, that they're telling me they want, and how many iterations that will be. It might be 2 world championships. It might be 4 world championships. It might be 1 regional race followed by 2 national races and then 1 world championship, whatever. It doesn't matter what the path towards the outcome that they're seeking is. Once I start to get to know a person pretty quickly, I know how to get them to where they need to go, but everyone is a little bit different. And so the point I want to make is, it's, as Tony said, for some people, it can be all or nothing. You might want, you're willing to make any sacrifice necessary to get the thing that you've identified as the thing that you want. So that all or nothing is actually a thing for people that I've worked with. However, that is kind of uncommon. And so for people who don't think that way, I can get them pretty close to that all or nothing aspect so that they can get the outcome that they want, which requires a little bit of all or nothing. And that's usually through the repetition or the cyclical event work. So maybe they've got to work their way through 6 or 10 events in order to get to the point where they understand how to perform at the outcome level that they expected of themselves. So I think that not everyone is all or nothing. Some are all or nothing, and it's our jobs as coaches or as mentors to some degree to understand who's standing in front of us and how to best shape them in conjunction with their own thoughts, ideas, and how it's best unfolding for them. And I would be remiss now to not say this. You can design the perfect plan, the perfect trajectory for someone, and 3/4 of the way through the trajectory, they've had enough, and they just bail, or they have a radical shift in their focus, or they implode, or they explode, or they don't, whatever. So there's a time and place where the best laid plans don't always play out as that individual or you hoped they would. So that's life, man. Your responsibility is to efficiently and effectively create that individual's outcome as outlined by them, and hopefully achieve the level of satisfaction or happiness or expectation that person had, so that at the end of the event or at the end of the coaching assignment, for lack of a better term, you can both look at each other, nod at each other, and think, yeah, that was legit.
You guys got any thoughts on that? Before I got a couple comments here, but
Yeah, just one thing for me,
Sure.
just in line with what Sean was saying here and what actually Tony was saying earlier about defining mindset, we also have to define outcome, and we have to be very careful on what it is that the person is pursuing, because humans will be conservative in their pursuit, and somebody may be cutting themselves short, and so you may have to do a redialing in of the outcome that they want, and help them see that they can do more. And so that's part of the coaching process. It becomes once you've identified what can they do with the time that they have to allocate to whatever pursuit they have, and if they make it a priority, then we can go that route. But you have to be very careful when you speak to people that tend to self-deprecate and not actually aim as high as they could go, even with the time that they have.
And on the other side of the coin, I'm sure we've all worked with people who are ferocious and can't find the right balance because they are so target locked on the outcome that they want for themselves that their family life starts struggling, their work life starts struggling. I can think of a variety of different athletes, either international pilots who were having to deal with time zone changes and sleep issues and blah, 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 all of the scheduling things that come along with that. Like, there's to nail an outcome that is lofty, you have to make sacrifices. And it's each individual, you've got to find the right balance for them. And then sometimes that balance is actually holding them back from destroying everything around them because they are so focused on the thing that they want in their mind as a solo outcome.
Tony, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I agree with both Seb and Sean. Like, the idea is that you need to learn each individual and learn where they're at within their career of athletics or education or whatever they're hiring you for to coach them, and understand that they're not robots, and that we have to really manage stress as much as possible, and that allostatic load of life and the physical demands that you're putting on them through a training plan, and making sure that you're checking in as often as possible to make sure that they're on the path that they want to be on, both mentally and physically. And I think a lot of coaches really neglect that mental side of things in terms of family life, stress, those type of dynamics, and think that I designed the perfect program, therefore if you don't get the results that you want, or if you can't follow it, that's a you issue and not a me issue, when in fact it is definitely a coaching issue, right? You should be able to have the set plan in mind that'll get them to their goal, but also be flexible within that dynamic in order for them to achieve that peak performance, and just making sure expectations and reality are the same. Like Seb said, you can push people to overcome some of their ideologies of what they're capable of. But you also can run into those people that are so unrealistic with their goals that every time they don't meet them, right, they quit due to those expectations just not being able to match that reality. So it's a lot of back and forth with honing in on that individual person, communicating with them, and understanding their psyche of what they are and who they are and what they're coming in with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually the topic that you just raised, it's the right topic right now, I feel, to expand on, because I think there's two paths that we all have to walk as coaches. We have to walk the walk that we're going to coach. And so that means if you want to coach someone to become the best dart thrower in the world, well, you better have held a dart in your hand and made a few mistakes along the way. And so there's the solo journey of all of those lessons that you have to learn in order to shape someone else who's asking for your help. That takes some time. And then there's the other journey that you have to walk, and that's becoming a coach. And in my early days of coaching, and I'm not sure when my coaching started, it started long before I started high performance coaching. It started, I guess, back in the military to some degree. So that level of coaching, you got to make mistakes. You got to figure out how you best work as a coach. You've got to learn how to do it better, and that just takes freaking time. And so I think the point I'd like to put across is, and to Tony's point, when I first started coaching high performance racing, I wasn't constantly hassling my athletes about their stress loads within their work-life balance or how much sleep they got in respect to the demands of their work and that big assignment that had to get done by Friday night or else. And so I wasn't taking those things into account as strongly as I needed to at the early days of my coaching, even though every single day, every single athlete that I worked with was responsible to report to me every day on a whole pile of data streams and a whole pile of variables and a whole pile of inputs to include how they feel, how much they drank, how much sleep, yada, yada, yada. But I wasn't really balancing things well, or I didn't understand the algorithm well enough on creating an optimal human based on all of the unknown stressors within their life. I had to kind of rejig my learning a person process to better understand the nuances that were kind of several layers deep beyond the actual physical or mental performance. I understand that way better now, but you've got to understand that through your own life, making mistakes, and then as a coach through your own coaching life, making some mistakes to finally be able to easily talk about these things, I think. So finally, my point is this. If you are looking for a coach out there right now, and you've just found someone who's been in the game a year, I'd say keep looking. Go find a coach who's been in the game a long time if you really want to push the envelope to become the best version of yourself. Now, maybe there's some coaches out there that ain't happy hearing that. Well, I'd rather point one of my friends to someone who's been coaching for 15 years than someone who's been coaching for 5 weeks. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I guess the caveat to this would be how has that person been coaching? And because there is a lot of people walking around with 20 years of experience doing things wrong for 20 years and they're just better at doing things wrong.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah,
So-
sorry.
No.
I think that automatically. You're right. Yeah.
But I think it's extremely valuable, and I've made some catastrophic mistake, and I say catastrophic, they weren't really catastrophic, but they were in terms of coaching and relationship with some of my athletes in the beginning of my coaching career. Just bringing that nose to the grindstone mentality that you need to be obsessive if you want to accomplish a lofty goal, and to a certain extent you temporarily might have to, but it didn't take into consideration the things that Tony mentioned or Sean reiterated. And so I've made the exact same mistake, and I've had some really, really good athletes that had some incredible performances eventually fall off the face of the planet, fall off the face of my gym just on account of not being cut the break they needed or not having, and I was always open to have the conversations and everything. That was never different for me. So if somebody came to me with some problems at home or whatever, we'd have some great chats, and I was always there for them, but I wasn't proactive enough in digging deeper into these circumstances so that I may adapt the things that I was asking them to do and change my attitude in relation to how I wanted them to accomplish certain things. So it's an extremely valid point. I've made that mistake for at least a decade as well.
Tony, you got any thoughts on this?
Not really. Not anything to add to that. Everything sounded pretty good. I know you had some questions that you wanted to get to as well.
Yeah, just a couple comments here from Carl. Good day, gents. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope you're doing well as well. Daniel, afternoon team, and KH. And then we got this question from Emma Jarman. Is there an optimal mindset for clients, or is it that more on the coach to figure out how to best to reach / appeal to their current arrangement of priorities? Tony, I'm going to go to you first. What do you think?
An optimal mindset. I definitely think that there's an optimal mindset for each person. So it kind of goes into both of the questions here. And you can kind of figure that out too by doing a thorough questionnaire and talking to the person and figuring out where they're at within their life situation, right? So like if you have someone who is in school trying to get their bachelor's degree or master's degree, right? That mindset's going to be a little bit different because you want them to be as focused on school as they are within their sport endeavor, right? You don't want one to take away from the other. So that mindset might not be as all or nothing. It might be more of a balanced mindset. And then you might have someone who is a professional athlete trying to peak and win whatever event they're trying to win. And that mindset might require more of that all or nothing mentality in order for them to do that and to achieve that. And understanding what dynamics go into that, right? You also have to factor in socioeconomic status, and if they're able to do the things that you're asking them to do, can they train for if they're getting ready for like an ultra or something like that, can they train for 6 hours one day and not have it impact their work life. Like, are they training so much that they're going to get fired and then they can't afford to get the food that they need and they're not able to do those things, or they're in such a high stress, like all or nothing mindset, that they can't shut it off, and that affects their sleep and that affects their ability to be in more of like a parasympathetic tone. So I think there's an optimal mindset for each client, and it just takes a little bit of trial and error and getting to know that person and what they're capable of, and where they want to go, and also being able to understand some of the faults within that person in terms of where they see themselves. They might see themselves in a negative light, so being able to turn that into a positive one can open up a completely different dynamic of mindset that they never thought they had. And I think that just comes with like that psychological communication component of really understanding the why behind the person that they're doing it for, and who they are. And I think once you get those things under control and a firm grasp of that, you can start to really evaluate and kind of guide them to whatever that mindset is. I don't think you should ever put your idealistic mindset onto someone. I think it's more or less guiding them into their optimal mindset instead of guiding them to this optimal mindset that you have picked out for certain people. I think as coaches, we tend to fall into that trap a lot of times of thinking that we know what's best for the athlete, and that this is the gold standard that everyone should be achieving and shooting for. And that's just going to set you up for failing that athlete as a human being, and not being able to get them to achieve what they're capable of, because you've put such a burden on them that person individually is just not able to obtain.
Yeah. Seb, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. And then, inversely, you're gonna have the people that are doing catastrophic things that are really impeding their success. And as a coach, you're gonna have to say it, because if you don't say it, it's not going to work. So some of those things and some of the key drivers and some of the key mindset that I would say that I've seen over the years is people with self-belief, people with drive, people that take ownership over their success. They're doing the things and the small things and the accessory work, and they're doing the research. They're getting home if they have a lofty goal in mind. If they are a tactical athlete that's preparing for a selection or is preparing to go to a tactical team somewhere, or whatever the case may be, oftentimes I've seen the guys be successful, or the guys that are training on account of their peers. Like, I don't want to let anybody down. I don't want to let the team down. I want to contribute. I want to do those things. And so if you didn't have that mindset and you were me, you are likely to fail in that pursuit. And so I would say another very, very a very good predicator of success is coachability. Coachability is necessary. If you're going to a coach on account of saying, I'm seeing a coach, and that's great, but you're actually not listening to the coaching, and you are not, working. And this is a cooperative process. Like, I'm not talking about just going to a coach and being told, X, Y, and Z, and just proceeding like a robot. Like, there has to be some synergy, and there has to be some mutual understanding. But being coachable is massive. And, I've had athletes over the years come to me and say, so-and-so started, 6 months after me, and how come they can do muscle ups and I can't? And how come they can do X? And we have very similar physical capabilities. Well, every time I corrected that person never made that mistake again, because they consciously focused on not repeating the mistake. Whereas I've repeated the same thing 7 times to you and you're still doing it. So you're listening to the words, you're applying it immediately, and then you immediately get it out of your head. So and inversely, somebody can start really focusing on all the little things you tell them to do better, and really start messing other things up. So you need to have that right balance. But sometimes the coach has to step in to make that happen.
Yeah. Sean, you got some thoughts? While I fix my tongue here.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Whenever someone approached me as to be their coach, I only needed one thing: a freaking good attitude. If you show up with a good attitude, I'll sort the rest out. And by I'll sort it out, I mean I'll figure out whether we're going to be able to work together or not. And that might just take me a day. That might take me a couple of weeks. I'll start figuring out if you're coachable. I'll start figuring out if you've got the grit, that is required to achieve the outcome that you told me on day one, I'll figure out a whole pile of things. But right from the get-go, the first point of contact when someone reaches out to me, if you don't got a good attitude, I don't have the time to give you a good attitude. I don't have the rest of my life to help you understand what a good attitude is. I'd rather just work with people who have good attitudes. And that's where my focus lies. So show up with a good attitude on day one, and the rest will get sorted out. And maybe after a couple of weeks, the athlete and myself, or the client and myself, will realize that maybe we're not vibing, maybe we're not synchronous, maybe we can't work together in the most optimal and efficient manner. We could work together, but maybe not optimally and efficiently. And so if that's the case, then I'm going to let them know that I've got a friend who you might be better working with, who is more in line with how you're vibing right now. And I won't say it precisely like that, but I'll say it in a way that offers the other individual a path forward, that they're going to have better success with another coach than with me, because I'm not for everyone. And I don't think every coach is for everyone. So I think show up with the kind of mindset that works well for me to work well with you, and that is a good attitude.
Tony, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think what Seb talked about, like the locus of control, right? If your athletes can just focus on the things that they control, and Sean too, right? Like you can control your effort, you can control, for the most part, your nutrition selection, you can control your sleep, right? If you focus on those things, the things that are in your control, I think that can set you up for having a very successful mindset as well. The people that have that mindset of, you know, this person is doing this type of training, shouldn't we be doing this type of training, or this person's doing this and they're going to beat me, you know, and they're focusing on the things that are out of their control and the things that they can't really have an impact on. I think that can start to manifest itself in a negative mindset of not listening to the coach, of wanting to do stuff that they're not really capable of. And I'm sure you guys get this all the time with the coaching, where you'll have a new athlete who is very ambitious, and they'll see the elite performers in their sport, and they'll look at their training programs, or they'll follow them on Instagram and like, oh, this guy's doing this, why aren't we doing that? And it's like, you can't even do a barbell back squat appropriately, and now you want to do depth jumps, or you want to do all this other stuff. And it's like, I think that goes back to that realistic expectations of making sure, hey, control what you can control, focus on the things that will make you better where you're at. And I think that can help shift and shape their mindset to a more positive one, a more realistic one that they can fully take control of, right? If they can take control of their mindset and buy into that, I think that's going to create the most successful athletes. The ones that can't do that are always going to be chasing their tail and chasing other people and focusing on those type of things. And those are the people that are going to switch sports, get burnt out, and not really live up to their full expectations of what they're capable of.
Well, on that point, Tony, there's been a couple of different paths that can go with for me in my experience. One is the individual will start doubting the process, probably because they're new to the process and they don't understand my way, they don't understand the process, they don't understand how the whole thing works. And so maybe they're only a few months into it and they're scratching their head now thinking, is this the right way to do things? And it's not uncommon for an athlete to start thinking that. And if that conversation comes up, I simply just state, yeah, it works. And here's how I know it works, because everyone before you has achieved the outcomes that they wanted. The guy who wanted to be the world champion, he's now a world champion. The girl who wanted to be ... she's now ... And so the body of work that comes beforehand, the body of work that athlete is unaware of, perhaps just a few months into it, that's not a bad time to not boastfully reinforce the fact that the process works, but just help them understand that the process works based on all of the outcomes previous to them showing up for the first time. Now, the second tricky part is when someone starts doubting the process, and to your point, starts looking around and doing quote unquote extra. And as they're slipping in the extra work on the lowdown and in the silence, and you're not being made aware of it day after day, week after week, as a coach, I'm now starting to look at numbers thinking, what is even going on here? Why is he or she starting to backslide? What is going on with their sleep pattern? Why are they, this doesn't make any sense. But those kind of patterns don't show up like just in one day. They show up 2-3 weeks down the road, where then I have to ask them, what is going on? Because this isn't making sense. Why are you not performing the way you should be right now? Sean, I've been doing secret training on the side. When I've got to have those conversations, and I do, and I have, it doesn't go well. I mean, it's not like I'm barking at them or treating them like a child wagging my finger at them. I don't do that, but I'm super clear with them when it comes to this, that can never happen again. Stay in the process. Don't invent your own process embedded into the process and start hurting yourself. Start injuring yourself over the long term. So there is a little bit of that looking around and wondering if the program works for sure.
Yeah. I have, Seb, you brought up a great point earlier about integration, about like taking the skill sets that you're being taught and actually integrating them into your life. And I think it's interesting because it works for not just physical performance, but, you know, going to therapy or doing any sort of learning a new skill, is that you have to integrate the new information. Otherwise, that information just disappears. It's not like you can just all of a sudden pull that out of your back pocket when stress all of a sudden happens, right? It'd be like trying to pull off an Uchimata when you've never trained it before and just be like, oh, I saw it on Instagram, I'll be able to pull this off, no problem in a roll. No, not going to happen. Carl says, Seb brought up owning success. I think everyone agree owning faults or failures is as important, but I kind of want to dive into this one a little bit on owning success. Can you elaborate on that for me, Seb?
Yeah, you just have to be an actively participating member of of what it is that you're engaging yourself into, right? So that's putting yourself in there wholeheartedly. And if that means 2 hours a week, but because that's all you can allocate to this at this point on account of, you know, life or your work or whatever the case may be, then maximize those 2 hours. Listen to your coach, follow the process, put in the work hard, you know, do all the things that you can control, as Tony mentioned earlier. Make sure that you're getting proper recovery, make sure that you're eating properly. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be good. You know, it's really interesting when you start talking to athletes and there's so many schools of thoughts on nutritions and things, but the vast majority of high performers are not necessarily counting every macro. Like, they're just not. And it's really interesting how we sometimes go down those drains, right? So, but are you doing decently? Are you putting the effort in? That's what I mean by owning your success. And again, if the person decides to, you know, get a coach in their life on account of not having the necessary knowledge or technical knowledge or abilities to reach a goal that they set for themselves, and then they go and make stuff up on the side, what are they actually saying here? I went and hired a coach to come in and help me reach a certain outcome, and then I believe that I can do it better. Therefore, I'm going to start doing X, Y, and Z. That is not owning your success. If you think you can do it better, then you don't need that coach. Take that coach out of the game and focus on you, you know. But yeah, and I mean, if there are things, fundamental things that you are struggling with, make those fundamentals. Focus your energy in the fundamentals so that you can really have the strong foundation, as Toli alluded to with respect to the back squat, for example. I mean, he's absolutely correct. But what you'll see in the gyms generally is somebody going from a terrible form back squat to a terrible form back squat performed with 300 more pounds. You know, and all of this compounds the issues. If the person focused on having the right mechanics in an air squat and having the ability to to replicate the movement when the bars went under load and continue to build upon those mechanics, that's somebody taking into consideration that this will take time, and that is a part of owning the success as well. And that means, in line with the comments, it also means owning your mistakes. You know, I didn't sleep as well as I should have done. I skipped this training session you have set for me. I didn't show up on the last workout, mentally or whatever the case may be. And so, yes. So what am I going to do to make this better? Now you own the way forward.
Tony, you got any thoughts on owning success?
Yeah, I agree with Seb. Like, taking ownership of the things that you are in control of is really important, both in a things that you've done well and things that you can improve on. And I think really focusing on like owning those successes can be crucial for people. I know when my athletes check in and say the week hasn't gone to their expectations, it usually starts with a lot of negative things and a lot of self-doubt. And that's really focusing on things that maybe not is going to create the best mentality. Maybe we should think about why things didn't go the way they did instead of harping on the fact that they didn't go the way that they did, right? What was your, what happened in your life this week that was different than the previous week because things were going great the previous week, right? Understanding that there are different dynamics that affect performance, and to not just harp on the negative things when they don't necessarily go your way, because everyone's going to have a bad training session here and there. That doesn't necessarily mean that the program you're doing is not working, is a complete waste of time. And I think they can get into this big mindset of focusing on the negative things and not really focusing on the positive things. And I think that's really human nature in general. We tend to see the worst in ourselves, and we tend to harp on those things. And it's really hard for us to pat ourselves on the back a lot of times and look at the things that we're doing in a successful light. We tend to look at it in a negative one. And I think it's good to be aware of the things that you maybe fell short of, but not necessarily harp on them. Maybe focusing on how can we get 1% better the next day. Like, oh, I made this mistake of me and the family went traveling and I did my training session, but I wasn't the greatest on food, right? And it's like, okay, how can next time, can we better prepare ourselves so that the food isn't big of an issue? Can we make improvements on those type of things? Can we order water instead of soda when we go out to eat with the family? Not saying that you have to live, a monk life and never go out to eat and never celebrate and do those type of things, but finding small ways within the process of getting better incrementally, and that'll build those successes, and to not harp on the negative things, I think is something that can be very beneficial for those athletes.
Sean, any thoughts? Oh, Seb, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead,
Go
Seb.
We'll go Seb.
I'm gonna just be brief, but I totally jump on the bandwagon that Tony just drove by with, and the negative emotion side. This is something that coaches need to be aware of as well, because there are people that carry a lot more negative emotions than other people, and if they do that every time they don't reach even a micro goal set for themselves, they use it as an excuse to go down that negative rabbit hole instead of seeing it as a possibility for growth and logically override it the way Tony speaks about and say, okay, what have I learned from this and what can I do better to improve on this or to improve upon this. And so it is important to understand that if we have an athlete that shows up daily with a lot of negative emotions, that we may have to do some logical overriding for them and teach them how this is being utilized, so that you may have those setbacks and learn from them and grow from them.
Yeah. Sean?
Well, earlier we were talking about owning your success, or talking about the success achieved kind of thing. And so I think it is kind of an important little subtopic that we do have a certain responsibility to kind of own our own successes, so that we can demonstrate how a well-run program can create success, not just for ourselves, but for our athletes, of course, or who we're working with, of course. And so I don't know how long we'd known each other, Seb, but it'd been a little while until I finally said, yeah, I ride a fair bit, I guess. And we got into a conversation. Then I just casually said, well, I was a world champion in 24-hour solo mountain bike racing at one time, and then continued on with the next sentence. And you kind of did one of those, say what? And so I don't talk about those kind of things too much, or I didn't used to. And so what I did find in my live IG chats that I'd started, people would see me riding, and they'd be giving me like advice, like, hey man, you should try a different kind of pedal, that might help. Or, hey man, when you're doing your brakes, why don't you try? And they were thinking that maybe I wasn't a world champion. They were treating me like I was some sort of regional rider, and they had all the pro tips. But man, I've got tens of thousands of hours on a saddle and they've got 12 hours, and they were giving me advice. And I just thought, how can I even like get in front of this so that I don't have to keep saying, yeah, thanks for your tip. That's a good tip. And so finally I had to put on my little Instagram profile that world champion in 24-hour solo mountain bike racing, just so that I didn't have to deal with all of the pro tips on how to use brakes. And I think that that is kind of an important little sub topic, because I mean, what it should show is that the village idiot can put enough time and effort into a half decent program and produce an outcome for himself, and then produce an outcome for people that he works with. So if I didn't talk about those things, or if I just kept, hiding the successes, how on earth is that going to inspire others?
That's a good point. Tony, got any thoughts?
I think what Sean was talking about definitely makes sense in terms of being able to show your level of expertise as a individual who maybe have coached themselves, or also give credit to the people who have coached you to get to that point. But letting people know what you're capable of and who you've coached to get there is a great way to build buy-in and trust with your athletes more than anything, right? It's not, a lot of people find it to be maybe braggadocious or makes you seem a little arrogant, right? But if you're doing it in a manner that's building your community and building your buy-in with your athletes, I think that makes a ton of sense, right? If people know that you're a world champion, they're gonna more likely, even if the program doesn't necessarily fit them the best way, that placebo effect of this guy's a world champion, he knows what he's talking about, he knows what he's doing, is going to increase the likelihood of them being successful. When I was powerlifting and I got the opportunity to train with one of the world's best powerlifters, his name was Dan Green, and I trained with him for about a year and a half, and he had the world record total for 220 and 242. And every time I had a squat or a bench or a deadlift, and he was like, you got this, right? Like, I know you're capable of doing that based on what I've seen. I never missed that weight, I'll tell you that, right? So like, if you are that expert and you're able to create that in your community, you're going to be able to take those athletes to that next level of belief. And I think that belief in your coach and in themselves is going to really propel them to that next level. So I think that's a great point that Sean was making.
There's a small caveat I want to put on this, and it is owning success in a manner that is humble, right? Because you
it's
can own a
tricky.
success and then just sit on it for years, right? Be like, yep, I was a world champion.
Yeah, I didn't like
And then
talking about it, but I think it's things that do need to be talked about for sure, but in a way that isn't like yelling to the horizon, because again, mindset covers all the way between here and the horizon. So I think that there is a certain, it's not an opportunity to talk about it, but there's a responsibility to talk about it, but not too much.
Yeah. Steph, you got any other thoughts on this? Or you good?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of skip on the other side of the fence slightly, and just a few mistakes that I've seen coaches make over the years, which is taking more than they could chew. So if you get to a point where the athlete's outcome is out of your field of expertise, let them know. Let them know, look, I can take you here, but if your goal is to be a IBJJF world champ, here's the guy that you need to go train with to achieve this. It isn't me, and I can do what I can do, and I can bring you as far as I can. But if you really want to have that competitive edge, you may have to go there, And I think a lot of coaches have a hard time doing that. And obviously, if your life depends on it from a financial standpoint, that might be. And so, again, for the coach himself to take, or himself or herself to take into account what they need to do to be the coach they want to be. So if coaching at that level is something that they want to do, then they need to invest in themselves in order to be able to reach that level, to continue coaching at that level. Failing to do that is going to fail the athletes. And so that's one of the point I was wanting to make. And The other one was something super awesome that I forgot.
Dude, that was so awesome.
Probably the best point was going to be brought up all night. That was going to be the mic drop of the night right there.
How do we even finish with that one? Why? Let's save it right till the end.
Oh man.
Yeah, you
What's
do bring up
wrong
a
with
good
me?
point, though, Seb, is that, that coaches have to be athletes as well, right? And we talked about this a little bit ago in the fact that the coach needs to be someone who has at least been there at some point to be able to understand how to get there. But the question I want to ask is, can you achieve peak performance without a coach? Is that something that is doable, or would
Oh,
it
for
be
sure.
Yes.
more preferable to have a coach, or where do you think that line is where you would go?
I've
"I
rarely
need a
ever
coach
had a
now"?
coach. In fact, have I had a coach? I've never had a coach. I just did a quick flashback. I've never had a coach in any of the careers that I've had. I created myself into a world champion without a coach, and I never had a coach teach me how to coach 24-hour solo world champions. I've never had a coach. I've learned how to move forward as a coach based on what the military taught me, and then what I learned as a computer system engineer teaching there, and what I learned teaching at a police college, and what I learned at blah blah blah. All of the teaching moments, all of the interaction moments. It wasn't that I was able to easily carve a path forward in isolation. I just didn't have a coach. What I had learned from the military was to look around me and identify who did things really well and absorb their bandwidth. And I'm not talking about like some sort of bizarre vampire stealing their energy. I'm talking about identifying amazingness and then somehow trying to cherry pick a tiny bit of that amazingness and insert it into my little peanut and hope that it was enough. Maybe I never had time to grab a coach, or maybe I don't know why I've never had a coach, but I've always forged my own way ahead through the way that I was taught in tier 1, I guess. So yeah, there's a way that it can be done. I'm not saying it's the right way. I'm just saying that there is a way.
Tony, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for the most part, it depends on what you're trying to get out of what you're doing, right? Like, I think if you're someone who wants to become a coach, I think there is a lot to be said about learning the process on your own and learning how your body responds to certain things and understanding those dynamics. Even as an athlete, I find that that's valuable as well. Because if you do have a coach and you're able to understand your body and how it's responding, you're able to give better feedback to that coach so that the coach can further create the program that best fits the feedback that you're given. Whereas people who have solely relied on coaches don't necessarily have the best awareness of what their body's doing, how it's responding. They're typically in that I'm going to go no matter what mindset, and that doesn't necessarily lend itself to giving feedback to create the best program. But I think if you are a top level athlete and your only goal is to be the best athlete possible, I think a coach can alleviate a lot of that stress of trying to design your own program, of trying to make sure you're doing everything right. It can even build a group dynamic that you're able to train in that can elevate you to that next level too. Because if you don't have a coach and you're training solo, that can diminish your ability to perform at a high level versus if you're training with some of the best in the world. I know when I was doing jiu-jitsu and I was getting ready for PANS, we had a bunch of people come down. It was called Ring One, and they came down and trained at our gym. It was at Marcio Cruz's gym, and we had Gracie's come down. We had tons of black belts come down that are winning, and being able to train with them and pick their brain and learn from them as coaches was invaluable success-wise. And I think most high-level athletes have coaches for those particular reasons so that they don't have to really think about those type of things. But I was with Sean. I never really had a coach, mainly because this is what I love to do. Like, I'm very inquisitive about how training works, and I like to be my own guinea pig and experiment and read the research, and then I try it out on myself, and I continue to evolve that way. So I think if your mindset is to learn and to grow and to continue to pursue that from a coaching perspective, not having a coach can help that. But if your main objective is to be the best athlete on the planet for your given sport, I think a coach can facilitate that better than being solo can.
I agree. And just one little piece to add to that, and that's fascinating, Tony, because um, I I don't meet too many people that have run their program like that to some degree. So that's super cool. The other aspect to trying to do it by yourself and try to be adventurous and learn as much as possible and etc. is through that process I started to experiment on myself on behalf of my team. So I'd go and do a 24-hour solo, and it'd be like not quite a full-on gong show because I'd just try to race on water for the first 6 hours. But I did get a bit crazy out there. I did get a bit crafty. I did push the envelope. And I felt at some point out of the 30 24-hour solos that I did, some of those races, I crafted them to be more difficult than they needed to be in order to learn the lessons for myself, in order to impart them on my athletes. And all of my athletes knew my deal. Sometimes when I was out there raging against the storm, it was for their behalf, not for my behalf. And that is a pretty interesting aspect of building a team when they know that you're all in it for them, not just for yourself. And some of your coaching principles come from paying great sacrifices for to the benefit of the team. I think it just somehow helps everyone understand that you've got their best interests in mind.
Any other thoughts on that? I got.
Yep,
Go ahead, Seb.
I do. So something that hasn't been spoken about, well, it has, it's been touched on a little bit, but it is easy if you drive to the same location all the time with your GPS on, and you're not paying attention to what you are doing or why you are doing it, and you don't have a bit of an understanding of what it is that you are doing, in 10 years you will drive to the same location still not knowing how to get there. And so it is important as an athlete that you're invested in the process of learning as well as the coach is teaching you movements, things, programming, it's all good. But if you put the blinders on and go 100 miles an hour and never look around, never try to understand the deeper necessity of certain things, in 10 years you're going to need a coach again. You know, you're always going to need a coach because you've never actually done the work to develop yourself. So yes, I do believe that having a coach really, really increases efficiency in getting somewhere much quicker, because the majority of us, and I'm in the same boat, the only time I've had coaches were in martial arts. That's it. And all I can say is there's 3.5 decades of time spent, you know, learning what I now know. And so if you're coming in and you're hoping to take the same path, are you locked in for the next 30 years? And how are there stupid things you're going to do along the way that are going to prevent you from achieving your goal ultimately, because you'll get catastrophically injured? And I was extremely lucky. And so those are two things I'd like to, you know, to kind of add in there. While you're going through the process, understand why you are doing what you are doing, learn as you are doing it. So when you've been coached for 3 or 4 or 5 years, in 5 years, you'll look at things differently. You'll understand the fundamentals behind it.
That's a great point. Sean, you got...
I do. I have to add this in because it's in line with what Seb just said, and probably in line with what Tony would have said, I think. And it's this. So you're working with an athlete. It's now 3 years. It's now 5 years. It's now 10 years. At 10 years in, one of my athletes, I handed my business off to her because she was awesome. And I taught her how to be me to some degree. She could run the program as I ran the program, but probably better. And so it's not just our job to kick that ass. It's our job to teach that ass how to go kick that ass. And so that's what I did for over a decade. And now she's running a company that used to be mine, but it's now in her name. And she's probably doing a hell of a better job.
Tony, you got any thoughts on that?
No, I agree completely. It's our job as coaches to educate so that when they leave, they're going to leave better than they showed up and more educated than they showed up. And I think that's a reflection of you as a coach. Your athletes are a reflection of you as a coach. So if they're going places, you want them to be as knowledgeable as possible, especially if maybe things aren't going the way that they want it to during that race or that competition. If they're not educated the way that you should have been teaching them, they're not able to adjust on the fly, and they're not able to get that peak performance for that given day, because you might have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C, depending on how you feel that day, depending on how the conditions are. If it's 100 degrees, that race may look a lot different than if it was 70 degrees, right? And being able to educate them so that they're able to make those adjustments is just as important from a coach's perspective.
I got one comment here, and then we'll do some final thoughts for the afternoon. But Carl says peers can be great coaches if the aim is similar, in my opinion. And I was thinking something similar to this earlier, Sean, when you were saying that you didn't have any coaches, and I think you had osmosis as a coach, right? You surrounded yourself by awesome people, and then watched what they did. Just did that to begin with, right? And I think that's a part of it, is that if you can surround yourself with awesome people, you get to take all that information through osmosis, or more directly, and like actually use the skills that they have too, right?
Yeah, as long as you're paying attention.
As long as you're paying attention, exactly. Yeah. Now let's get some final thoughts on achieving peak performance. So, Tony, any final thoughts on anything we've talked about so far today?
Yeah, I think something that Sean talked about earlier was this idea of understanding the process and believing in the process. And I think as a coach, it's our job to reiterate what that process looks like in order to achieve peak performance. When you're looking at like Olympic athletes, track and field is a big one that comes up, and especially with sprinters, you have, maybe 5 or 6 races before you get to the Olympic gold medals, and the people that win those races aren't necessarily the ones that are going to be winning the Olympics, right? And I think that's because they're trying to peak for the Olympics. They're trying to peak for that one big race where everyone else is trying to peak for every single race, right? And I think having an understanding that peak performance is not something that is going to be done every race that you do. Your body's only able to peak so many times and perform at the highest level without getting injured. So making sure that you understand that process of this is a B race or a B competition for us. We're there just to see how training's going, and we're able to adjust from there so that we're able to peak for our A race or A competition. So if you're working with an athlete and you have a year, making sure that you're able to clearly define what is your A race, what is your B race, what is your C race, and then you set up that training program so that they know exactly where they're going to be and why they're going to be in those positions when those races come. So maybe if they get a 3rd place in a race when their ultimate goal is 1st place, they understand that a little bit better, that you're not peaking for that one and you're peaking for the other one. And just being able to understand and refine that process, again, is that educational piece that allow them to get that peak performance for the most desired race or competition that they have.
Seb, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't spoken much about tactical athletes or people that are needing fitness for their everyday life in the first response world or in the military, for example. And I think what happens oftentimes is these people, in order to stay motivated in their job, they're doing it upon setting some goals for themselves, which are hard and difficult. But sometimes what happens is they divert from the mission, which in the case of a patrol officer, for example, would be to be a good generalist, right? So if you turn yourself into a specialist on account of, keeping yourself motivated, but you have fallen off the wagon on a variety of other skills that can need to be tapped on, and you have not, you're doing it wrong. So now you're going to have to prioritize. What is your priority? Is your priority to be an asset for your organization? If that's the case, you may have to put the 700-mile race out on the back burner for a while, right? And so it's not that you necessarily cannot do some of those things if you do them occasionally, but if you are consistently getting off the generalist bandwagon to go in a specialty and peaking here, there, and everywhere, you are taken away from what could lead to catastrophic consequences in the field. And so just something to bear in mind if your fitness is required for duty.
Sean, final thoughts?
Well, here we are at the end, and all I'm thinking is like, wow, I need another 7 hours to talk with these guys. This is the problem when you are in a room with experienced coaches who are awesome. It could be a conversation that goes on for the rest of the day. So to Tony's point, we have barely scratched the surface as far as I'm concerned. Honestly, this is a several day long conversation. You raised the subject of assigning strategic or tactical implementation of prioritization against races. In my world, when I was coaching, you were never allowed more than 3A races per year, period. I don't care what your plans are, pal. Forget about your plans, because now this is the way it is. No more than 3A races. Now let's talk about your B races. Now let's talk about your C races. Now let's talk about your expectations in the C and my expectations in the C. What I want you to focus on and learn is ... So, I mean, holy moly, that conversation is a whole day's worth of chat. So, Tony, thank you for bringing that up, because what it has reinforced is how little we've scratched the surface on this. And now to Seb's point, how do I even touch that? So on the money. So you nailed it out of the, like cracked it out of the park. And I can't even add anything more to that, because that topic is so relevant. We just have to have that conversation over the course of another hour at another time.
I guess that'll be up to me to reschedule the four
Get on
of
with
us
it. Get on with it.
right, to have this conversation again, which we absolutely will, because this is a massive topic, and I kept the concept broad on purpose so that we could really find a lane and utilize it well, because this is it's a very big subject. So we'll get back to it. And Tony, don't I point to you up here, Tony? You'll be back on here again, and I'll get this panel reset up, and we'll have a fantastic conversation, because this one was awesome. So Tony, thank you very much for being on. Seb, thank you for joining us last minute. Do really appreciate it. It's fantastic. So as we all learn what peak performance is, that means we can build ourselves into a higher version of ourselves and grow into the person that we want to be. And we can do that with us every day here on The Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.